I'm just absolutely delighted to have a marvelous panel of esteemed, accomplished legislators join us, particularly at this time. Before going forward, I should tell you a bit more about the Brennan Center, the co-host for this event. This is an event we really were delighted to work with Alabama State to put together because what we think about our work enhancing democracy, our goal is to defend, develop, and spread as much as we can the idea that democracy should be responsive to everyone. And we do that from a nonpartisan perspective using research, advocacy, and communications. Our home office is in New York. I sit in DC, as Dr. Robinson said, but part of this initiative is our design to recognize that we can't get democracy right in this country unless we figure out how to get democracy right in the South. It was a project commenced long ago. We know that. It is obviously work that is continuing here now, and what we want to do as partners is to find ways to enhance that work with the tools that we have at our disposal. So one way to do that is, again, to sort of present people who've been in that fight in state legislatures across the region, and so I'm delighted, as I said, again, to bring to the conversation some folks who have a lot of interesting things to say. But to, again, set the tone of this conversation, we're thinking a lot about the role that representation plays in the American South. It is the most dynamic region in the country. More people are moving to this region of the country. A more diverse population is moving into this part of the country. That is reflected in the economy. But what it isn't as well reflected in is the representation in state legislatures. And that is evident if you just look at the read of any of these legislatures. Many of them in the South are one party and supermajority. And that's not necessarily the way that the electorate looks. And so the question really is how one navigates the process of policymaking that is responsive to all of the people in institutions that might not yet, due to gerrymandering or other policies, be reflective of what the public as a whole wants. And so helping us understand a little bit more about that today from lived experience, as I said, are people who've actually been in the trenches doing the work. So without too much interlude, I'm going to tell you who they are, and I want this conversation to be your opportunity to hear them tell their stories about how this has worked or not worked in your experience. So I'll start to my far right, actually the person I know the most. Full disclosure, before I joined the Brennan Center, I spent a term with Leader Daniels. Anthony Daniels is a representative from Huntsville, Alabama. He is the leader of the House Minority Party. And he has been in office, I think, since 2000, is it 14 or 15? 14. Next to him is Representative Kabir Kareem, who is from the state of Mississippi. To his left is Senator Rob Stewart, who is from Selma, Alabama, who represents Selma, Alabama. Next to him is Senator Charlene Oliver, who is from the great state of Tennessee, representing Nashville. And finally, to my immediate right is Representative Joy Walters, who represents the city of Shreveport in Louisiana. So please join me in welcoming all of our guests. So I want to start with a simple question, which is, why are you doing this? And I ask this in context. Most of you all probably know legislatures in the context of the United States Congress, a full-time job where a lot of cameras are always on, and you are, flown back and forth to do your work pretty regularly. Not that that's an easy job, but these jobs are often part-time. So I wonder, what led you to decide to pursue this path? And how are you managing to juggle or balance the job that really, at least in theory, is part-time with the other parts of your lives? Maybe I should start immediately to my right. Representative Walters, if you don't mind.
Good morning, or good afternoon, everybody. So I grew up seeing my godfather, Hillary Huckabee, the late Hillary Huckabee, fight for the people. He was the first black city councilman in my city. And so I just said, you know what, that's gonna be me one day. And then as I got older, I ran across black women legislators. And so my first job was in the Louisiana State Senate at the age of 16, and I just stayed on that track, but I also stayed advocating for people. Even before I received a position, I just stayed advocating for people. It is an interesting dynamic to juggle, because you, when you sign your name on the line, it's part-time, but it does have a full-time flavor, you know? And I wake up at 4 a.m. driving to the Capitol, driving to the Capitol for meetings and whatnot, because I live 4 hours away from Baton Rouge. And if you make one stop, then you're at 4 hours and 30 minutes from Baton Rouge. And so it's a sacrifice, but I love what I do. I love fighting for the people, and I won't stop.
Thank you. Senator Oliver?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So I grew up in the South. I'm originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. And I have a multitude of reasons why I do this work. I'm a sexual assault survivor. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. My family is actually here with me today. And I do it because of my kids right here. And I got into politics because of my oldest son sitting right here. He's 12, was born 2 days before Trayvon Martin was murdered. And that was my Emmett Till moment to say I must do more. And so I fight every day for them. And I co-founded an organization in 2016. When Donald Trump got into the arena, I co-founded the Equity Alliance to push back against his type of politics. The Equity Alliance is a statewide organization in Tennessee who engages through civic engagement, racial justice, and voting rights. And so a lot of the work that we've done on the ground as grassroots organizers is challenging the Tennessee Republican supermajority. And so I got, famous for that, registering voters across the state. We registered 91,000 black folks in 2018. Thank you. Yes. And we also sued the Republican supermajority twice and won on civil rights cases. So thank you. So it's possible to win in the South. But when I got into the legislature, I became what I didn't know in 2022 when I got elected. I was the only woman legislator with children in daycare and in school-age children, school-age kids. And so I ended up championing childcare. And so my experience as a woman legislator is uniquely different from anyone else in the legislature. I am doing drop-off and pick-up every day in the morning before I even get to 8:30 floor session. That is nobody else's experience but mine in the legislature. And so this is a full-time job on top of the full-time job that I do have, because we are working class legislators. We're not rich to be able to do this full-time. So it is a challenge. And then the other challenge for me is that I represent Nashville, where the Capitol is. So my constituents don't understand that from January through April, I am in full legislative mode. So they don't understand that I can't come to your civic engagement panel discussion in the evening because I'm in floor session. They don't care. They want Senator Oliver to show up. So those are some of the unique challenges that just particularly black women face, in addition to all the other microaggressions.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Stewart.
Good morning. Is this still morning? Good morning and happy Selma 60. Hope you all can, yes. And I hope you all can come this weekend to Selma to pay homage. The one word I think about, there's so many reasons that I ran for office, but the first thing that comes to mind is lineage. My grandmother was a nurse on Bloody Sunday, my maternal grandmother, at Good Samaritan Hospital. And she died during my campaign in 2022 at 93 years old. And she told me that I would always be in politics. And when I think about my family lineage, being the great-grandson of sharecroppers in Gee's Bend, Alabama, because I represent Wilcox County, when I look in the audience and see people like Ms. Josephine Bowling McCall, who is from Lawrence County, whose father's life was cut down because he was a well-to-do black man and he was murdered by the KKK. And I think about all of those issues and how that informs my politics and the fight to uplift the disenfranchised. When I think about how I represent the Black Belt, and it's a region that still doesn't get their fair share of opportunities, that is what drives me daily. And I'm here to say that it's the honor of a lifetime to be able to represent the district that I was reared in, that I grew up in. I sort of have to be not only a politician, but you kind of have to be a community organizer, as well, as Sister Oliver was talking about. So some of the things that we've done to organize, because this is a community that not only are we disenfranchised, but we still exude self-determination anyway, in the face of degradation, in the face of oppression. So one of the most important things that we've done, besides all the legislation, I wake up with a mandate to give people something to vote for. So in January, we kicked off Selma 60 by having a warrant clinic. Me and my state representative colleague, because we know that criminal justice is something that plagues our community. We had a warrant clinic, and we involved the civil rights churches to let them know that our institutions are relevant. And we had a mass meeting focused on criminal justice. This past month, we know that we not only do we represent the Black Belt, but it's the stroke belt, the hypertension belt, the diabetes belt. And so we had a mass meeting focused on healthcare a couple of weeks ago for Selma 60, where we had health screenings at my family's church at Clinton Chapel AME Zion. We had health screenings in the fellowship hall, and we brought the state health officer there to let people know that, yes, we might live in a Republican society, but they still work for us, and we can have a government that works of, by, and for the people. So that's my mandate.
Representative Cream, you're on the other side of that line in the Black Belt. I'm curious if you had similar experiences that led you to decide to run, or something different?
Mine was, I didn't even want to do this. But before I get started, I would be remiss, you all, I'm from Mississippi, and we're in a state of mourning, members of the Black Caucus. We lost yesterday our first black legislator who was elected in 1967, the first black since Reconstruction, Robert G. Clark. And without him, there would be no us. And I would be remiss if I didn't come into this space and not, if you would, just a moment of silence to remember his work and his legacy. See, while they were fighting in Georgia with Julian Bond and all the media was there, the same thing was happening in Mississippi. And they didn't want all the media attention that they were getting in Georgia. So they said, we're gonna seat you, but you're gonna sit by yourself. So they took his desk out the front door of the Capitol and sawed it in half and set him over in a corner by himself without engaging with the other 121 members. And he was a caucus of one for a number of years. And now it's 54 of us. So without him, yes. And we're still underserved. We're still not representing the 40% population that we have in Mississippi. We're still underserved. But we would not be there if it wasn't so for him. So if you all would, just join me just for a moment in remembering Robert G. Clark, the first African American to be elected to the Mississippi Legislature. Thank you. Now, my journey. I come from a family of servants. That was just instilled in us from birth. But I never wanted to be an elected official. I wanted my oldest brother. He ran for office, and I was like his armor bearer. I used to go everywhere with him, drive him everywhere. And he ran for city council. Well, he ran for, believe it or not, he ran for this office that I sit in today, back in 1995. And it was a novice campaign. We didn't know what we were doing. We was just running, you know. And he ran for a couple of more offices. But I said all that to say, man has a plan, but God's got the master plan. Amen. And all of that time I was with him, I guess I was Joshua, because it wasn't for him. I was the one getting trained to sit where I'm at today. He became a city councilman. He lost his election, and I came back as a city councilman and beat the guy who beat him. And when this seat came available, God gave me the opportunity to serve in it. So all of us, our jobs are to make whatever positions we hold a little bit better than how we found them. But we can't be ashamed to represent the people who sent us to these positions. And I find that on a daily basis. We want to be everything but who we are. You know, and I don't mean to be, but being black is divine. I mean, so I'm here because God has a purpose for me to be in this seat. Again, I love my brother, my oldest brother, and I wanted him to be in this House District 41 seat, but God saw it different. And so I'm here, I'm serving my third term in this seat. They're messing with the lines right now. I got to possibly run again in a special election. But you know, God's in charge. And we're gonna keep doing what we're doing, and we're gonna keep representing the people.
So Representative Daniels, I want to invite you to answer that question, but also perhaps, if you're open to it, you've taken on an additional role within your caucus to lead it. Again, what were you thinking at the time? But you know, what led you to choose, beyond the work that involves representing your district, working on behalf of a caucus, again, in the context of a supermajority?
You're right, I don't know what I was thinking. First of all, thank you guys for hosting this wonderful event, and thank all of you for being here today. My background is a little bit different, similar to Senator Stewart's. My grandparents and my parents actually were born and raised on a plantation as sharecroppers. It was 1978 that my grandparents were able to move in a nearby community, about 4 years before I was born. So I'm literally one generation removed from being a sharecropper myself. And so for me, it was at Alabama A&M University during my undergraduate years where I got an opportunity to do an internship by Commissioner Bob Harrison, late Bob Harrison, to learn a little bit about politics. Started out with voter registration drives in the hot sun at Alabama A&M to help him get elected. And then it transcended to me being involved in the Alabama Education Association. My bachelor's degree is in elementary education, and so I got involved in the Student Alabama Education Association, where I had the opportunity to study powerful leaders like Dr. Joel Reed and Paul Hubbard, who were the leaders at the time of the Alabama Education Association. But in my role as the president of the Student Alabama Education Association, I started to learn more about policy and politics. And then I was elected chairman of the National Education Association at the age of 23, where I had to leave graduate school and move to Washington, D.C., and where I took on an issue that was personal to me. I had $58,000 in student loan debt, and so I was thinking about who in the world going to marry me with this much debt. making $32,000 a year as a first-year teacher. And so during that time, I took on this issue of college access and affordability, and we organized student groups across the country and other organizations across the country to talk about the need for loan forgiveness. And so those of you that are getting the loan forgiveness, that gotten a lot of your loans forgiven, it is because of the legislation that was passed in 2007 that I ended up being the spokesperson for that campaign, the College Affordability Campaign. And so that's what sparked my interest in politics, seeing how an issue that started off as a conversation became reality and helping millions of people across the country. And so then I returned to Huntsville, Alabama, where I started teaching. I taught 3rd grade at a public magnet school, 4th grade at a Title I school, and 4th, 5th grade on an Indian reservation. But one of the things that I learned during all of those experiences that parents wanted the same thing. They wanted their children to be successful. While some of the experiences that I've had was low parental involvement, high parental involvement, practically no parental involvement. But on that reservation, in my observation of seeing the outhouses and the dirt roads and the poverty, and that the families and the community wanted their children to graduate from high school but return to the reservation. So there wasn't a whole lot of forward thinking from that community, and they couldn't see beyond their situation. And so it was those experiences that really pushed me to wanting to run for office. I ran for office in 2014. I was elected to the House of Representatives in 2014 and elected minority leader in 2017 in the middle of my first term. And so I've had an opportunity to really shape some legislation, but mostly play defense like we are today. Currently, there's a piece of legislation that we're debating right now, that HB 202. And this bill will expand police immunity, even to bad officers. So there's a civil side and there's a criminal side. We've negotiated the civil side down to where it's manageable, but the criminal side will make it very, and a Republican DA said to me, it will be impossible for me to be able to prosecute even a bad officer if this bill passes. And so the men and women that are on the front lines of my caucus right now, they're filibustering, and so we're going to make certain that this is a long nightmare for the Alabama legislature, and so you'll get some additional tax dollars today. And so it's because of experiences like that, and me growing up in poverty down in Bullitt County, Midway, Alabama, and understanding and seeing life very different once I got to Alabama A&M and was able to get out on my own. But even when I go back to the community that I was raised in, I still see the same issues. There's high crime in rural areas. It's not exempt, urban areas is not exempt for crime. There's high poverty in these areas. And so I think that for me, because I've lived it, it made it easier for me to represent and to represent unapologetically. And so in this leadership role that I'm in as a minority leader, sometimes it's counseling sessions. Dealing and helping members understand why certain things are not happening or why they're happening. But I will tell you, unlike other southern states, we've been able to shape legislation in the state of Alabama that, as Democrats, that we've not seen even in states that are closely aligned. And so we've been able to pass the tax credit for mothers and families that want to go back into the workforce. We've been able to stop some of the ALEC bills and the bills that you see across the country, across the state of Alabama, because not only do we use the rules in the legislature, we also use our voices in the media. And so right now is a mandate because of the person that's in the White House. We've decided that we were going to take on national issues and state issues at the same time. And we're going to help families understand the impact that the national issues have on their day-to-day lives, and ask them to really think for a second beyond the partisanship, beyond the D and the R, and think about A, which is Alabama. And so we're starting to turn the corner on some of these individuals, and we go into the lion's den. I've been speaking on more right-wing stations in the last 2 months than I have in the last 10 years. But it's working because they feed them a sound bite. And I feed them the details of what's not happening in their communities. And we're beginning to see a shift and a lot of the activity on the ground in these districts. And so for me, fighting for the communities that have fought so hard for me to be where I am and the shoulders that I've been able to stand on and afforded me this opportunity, I'm going to fight until it ends for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I heard in all of the responses so far a lot of conversations about, the people that you represent and the things that they are, wanting government to do, in particular maybe you to do on their behalf. And I'm interested because I hear often these frustrations by people who, are in the electorate who want, on one level, they feel frustrated because they don't feel like they're being heard or that they have an opportunity to speak in direct language to the legislature. Even with, the rise in technology, people do Zoom now as before. There's a real frustration that, at least as I've heard it expressed, that there are fewer conduits where they get to talk to people, whether they agree with them or not, about what the individuals want. And I'm interested to know if you all have experienced that in your work. I mean, in committee sessions, not necessarily with your work directly with your constituents, but do you have in these sessions the opportunity to hear in hearings or in testimony directly from the citizens and the people you represent about like what bothers them or what they want you all to do? I'll leave it open to whomever would like to jump in.
I think Donald Trump is doing a good job of helping us deal with those particular issues on the state level. What we hear, so my position is unique in a way. I actually get a chance to meet with the leadership on the other side to try to shape policy or water down pieces of legislation. And so we have the apparatus to do so. And so we get a chance to negotiate some of these terms before it gets to the House floor. There are only a few bills that actually make it to the House floor that's very controversial. And so what we've been able to find is we identified districts where there may be kind of purple or moving aggressively in another direction. What you'll find is most folks in the leadership on the other side that are over committees are moderate Republicans. And so in moderate Republicans, it has to be reflective of their moderateness has to be reflected in the voting electorate. And so what we do is we utilize their constituents and communicate with their constituents in order to drive pressure to them so that certain things can stay off the calendar or give us an opportunity to water things down. And so we play a lot of defense. I would say that this is a game of 3D chess when you're in a superminority. But you got to be able to utilize all the tools that you have from the House floor. And Republicans one thing that they don't like is to be challenged at the microphone or in public. And so when we do that, there are certain role players that we have. Representative Mary Moore, I love her to death, but she is the best defensive player that you can ask for. And she make them honest. And so whenever I get angry with them, I send Representative Mary Moore to the leadership meeting. And so there's absolute silence in the meeting when Representative Moore goes into the meetings. But you have to do different things you have to be an agitator. And you got to know how to push the buttons in order to get something out of it. And so my position is a little bit different than others because I get an opportunity to engage the members in their various roles, the positions that they're in, to agitate, and disrupt the process. Otherwise, we can either be jailer makers or tree shakers. I like being a tree shaker, to be quite honest with you, but they don't like that. And so you got to be able to find out ways where there's common ground, but also ways to agitate to the point to where they'll give up.
So I want to add to that. So particularly in Tennessee, I know most people in here saw what happened 2 years ago when our legislature expelled 2 of my colleagues, Democratic colleagues, for agitating on the House floor. And that is a symbolic representation of what we have been dealing with in Tennessee for the past 14 years since they've been in power. It's been this slow erosion of silencing dissent, not only from where they started silencing people and constituents, but now they've shifted this effort to now silencing us, the representatives inside the building. So since I've been there, not only are we trying to censure legislators, but we can't even, they have to have a time limit to speak on a bill, 2 minutes. And as a caucus, they only get like 10 minutes to speak on a bill. Now we're seeing sign bans inside of the building. You have to have a ticket to get into the gallery, the People's House, to engage. And so what we know is that the issues that we're fighting for are very popular in Tennessee. People are on our side, but they do not want that to get out into the public. So they're very responsive to the media. So we try to leverage the media and use that as a way to get our message out. 2 weeks ago, the governor had his State of the State address, and 12 of us walked out in protest of the school vouchers that we just passed in a special session in January. And so that was our way to leverage the media to say, the people are on our side, and they loved it, by the way. It for the Democrats who were against us walking out, it backfired. Because no one was talking about the governor's State of the State that night. Everyone still to this day is talking about the walkout. And so I think we have to continue to push back in unconventional ways in the legislature to get our message out and to leverage the media.
Let me follow up on that, and this may be for you, Senator, or others that want to respond. I appreciate the point about using non-traditional levers to try to both communicate with your colleagues, but perhaps also with the public. We talked a lot about media. I'm interested in social media in particular. Are you finding that to be a tool that's helpful or more of a vice as you all try to both send your message, but perhaps also respond to messages that you would want to oppose?
Well, it's a double-edged sword for social media. It is a great organizing tool to reach and democratize the civic process in reaching people who would not otherwise hear or know who you are. For example, I mentioned the walkout that we did 2 weeks ago. Had no idea that I went viral on TikTok for that. And so it's people all over the country that are seeing what's happening in Tennessee. But on the flip side of that, dare I say, social media has made us lazy as civic engagers, because we want to put everything on social media, but we don't want to organize offline anymore. We're not doing those traditional tactics that we saw in the civil rights movement that got us the legislative win. So sometimes social media can be a tool that works against us, as we see all the billionaires are trying to buy up the media and social media to silence us on those platforms. So we have to be careful about which ones we use there too.
Kareem, I want to go back to the question on how we communicate with the public. So in the Louisiana legislature, we have committee meetings. And in those meetings, the chairs have discretion on whether they want to time limit the legislators, whether they want to time limit the public, and whether they want to time limit the entire meeting itself. And so I'll give 2 examples. So for criminal justice, that's a committee that I serve on, or one of the committees that I serve on. We have 3 minutes as legislators, and you only get what they call one bite at the apple. So you better say everything that you want to say in that 3 minutes, because our chair, who is a former prosecutor for Jefferson Parish, she's not going to go back to you, or if she does, she'll have some pushback. And then nonetheless, the public will get 3 minutes, and you have to submit a green card, a red card, or a white card. And yes, and so we have, if it's a controversial bill, we have 1 hour for the affirming, 1 hour for the opposing. And so we like to draw the meeting out. I mean, because the type of legislator that I came into, I was elected 2 years ago, so the legislature that I came into, it is very extreme. So every committee chair is extreme. The vice chairs are not that extreme, but for the House, every committee chair is very, very extreme. And then when it comes to the Labor Committee, we may have like 3 bills, but we will be in there for 8 or more hours. But I mean, it's worth it. Again, when you want to take away civil service for the employees, when you want to do away with the labor unions, then we have a lot to say, and we're just going to take our time.
Representative Daniels, I see you gesture.
So from a social media standpoint, we try to be a little bit more coordinated. So every Wednesday, we do press conferences on the bills that we drop that's around our agenda. And that press conference is live streamed through our caucus website, which draws more traffic to the caucus's website or the Facebook page. And so being coordinated helps us a lot because you don't want members out there just going rogue, because the news cycle, they put a lot of dollars in the news cycle to control the news cycle, which then kind of turns things, turn the media against us. But the other thing that I think has been missing, not just from a social media standpoint, in general from progressives throughout the country, is that we don't play the best defense. And so what I've started to do now is, from a defensive strategy, like whenever there's the NIH funding, I take the funding, with the NIH funding, I take it to the area that's impacted by it. I do Google ads in those zip codes to put articles about the funding in the community that it actually impacts. Then once they click on that article in the Google ad, we run another article behind it to talk about someone that's lost their job because of the NIH funding. Or we'll do another ad that talks about someone that's on a waiting list to get a kidney or some type of organ transplant because of the experience cuts. So when you're playing defense, progressives, this is a message to the progressives across the country, you got to play defense, and you have to talk to we talk about 14 different things, and none of it sticks. But when you take on issues that directly impact the communities that you're trying to reach and turn, you have to micro-target. And when you micro-target, you're feeding this is a marketing campaign. I don't use political consultants to do social media. I use marketing companies. And a marketing company that sells products are the best people to use to be able to get your message to the demographics that you're trying to reach. So if I click on the ad that talks about the funding first, I'm in an uproar. Then the next ad that I get a few days later is talking about how it impacted families or someone that's my neighbor. Then it makes me more angrier. And then we just keep going, taking you down this dark road. So then when the election come around, you'll be really angry, and you'll decide to vote for a person that has your best interest at heart. And so the social media, the clicks, and all those things doesn't work. We've tried those things even in a business standpoint. It is a marketing campaign that you have to use to direct messages that people care about. I wouldn't talk about something in California in Alabama. If it does not directly impact the zip code and the people that you're talking to, it's not going to work. You're talking to yourself, and you're looking online every 5 minutes to see how many clicks you got. Well, you're talking to the choir. You're speaking out of a microphone instead of a megaphone. So if your numbers if you have with 30% of the legislature, you're never going to get to 51% because you're talking to the same people. They've read, it's like church. You've sent them from Bible study, and now you're preaching a sermon. You're talking about what they've already read and what they've been taught. You got to talk to people that are not in there, and we're not doing it. And that's what we've changed our strategy to deal with more marketing as opposed to trying to get individual members the pub that they need, the clicks that they need, because then that causes disruption in your caucus long term. So you got to coordinate, you got to script, and you got to target, and you got to play better defense.
I want to turn to the panel and ask a question that sort of came up in earlier comments about money. It obviously takes money to run these campaigns and to do the work, really. We at the Brennan Center do a lot of work on money and politics, and what we have seen, of course, is a change in the legal landscape that has made money more free-flowing. And not necessarily in a good way. The Supreme Court on one level has done that at the federal level for federal elections, but at the same time, the Supreme Court has made decisions about state corruption rules that has made it even more possible for people with unregulated efforts to put money into campaigns. I'm interested in whether you all have seen sort of evidence of the effect of that in your work, or perhaps even in campaigns as you've run them. I'm going to start with Representative Kareem and then go to Senator Stewart, if that's all right.
Sure. Thank you for the question. You know, as my colleague to the right of me was talking, I was thinking about how each community should start their own PAC to raise money to fund their interests with the legislature. And that's what, look, at the bottom line, that's what it's all about. It's about having money to do what you need to do to get your message out and change some of the dynamics. Because let me just say, folks, there's an element, I'm in Mississippi, but there's an element to just turn the clock all the way back and take the gains that have been made every day. And it takes courage as you put on the armor of God to go in that Capitol, knowing you're gonna lose. But you try to find that little win. Maybe it's an amendment, or as Representative Daniels said, kill a bill or play defense. You're not playing offense too often. But at the bottom line, it is about money and the access to money. And in Mississippi, that's one of the things that we've been talking about. Local communities starting PACs to fund and have interest and sending good people to the legislature. You know, sometimes people get elected, and maybe this is not the right space for that, but sometimes they get in office and lose their mind. You know, they forget who they're there to represent. I don't know how it is in you all's caucuses, but sometimes it ain't about the other side of the aisle. It's about toting the line in your own caucus. You know, making sure that, you know, it's hard to have a gun here and a gun right here. Someone like, you got to vote the right way. So, you know, that's part of the problem too. I don't know if folks want to talk, but that's part of the problem. So that's why we need PACs and monies to encourage the right people to get in office, to have the resources to make sure that the message that you're trying to get across is the right message, and informing your constituents as well as advocacy groups, because sometimes they have their own ideas on how a piece of legislation is supposed to work, and we give our enemies our fruit, and we give the folks who advocate for us the sword. So we got to do a better job in that too. So I hope I answered your question.
This is a very great question, because in my former life, before I got elected, I worked and during my first year in the Senate, I worked as a federal public interest lobbyist in DC for this organization called Public Citizen. And one of the campaigns that we dealt with was money in politics. And I just want to say the Citizens United case with the Supreme Court, deeming that corporations are people, that has been detrimental to our politics. And before anything, before me being a Democrat, above all things, I am a populist. I'm trying to figure out how can we do what's best for the common man. And I got to the Senate with $6,000. I had no money. It was give a round of applause. Yes, $6,000. Grassroots. My slogan was restoring power to the people. I mean, in my district, in my campaign, it was people who had way more money than me, but it was grassroots. Grassroots for me was the name of the game, and because I was in a rural community, if you didn't know me, you knew somebody in my family. And so we were knocking on doors, $32, I had a birthday fundraiser, and that's how I got to the runoff. The money didn't start flowing in until I got the Democratic nomination. Thanks, Leader Daniels, for helping elect Democrats. as well as in the runoff, things started being helpful. But for me, I think it's important for politicians to solicit, when you're running for office, those individual campaign contributions, and to let people know that, hey, I am working for you. I am trying to make the decisions that really influence and move the needle for shared prosperity.
Thank you. I want to move to the audience questions, and there are a lot of them. Thank you all for answering the call. I'm going to start, and I'm just going to make it free for all. If someone wants to jump in, feel free. Question 1, how can Southern states collaborate across the lines to address regional challenges like healthcare, education, and infrastructure? And I know my friends here on the panel from the Black Belt probably have a lot to say, but I'm going to leave it open to all to jump in if you have any thoughts about it. Are there sort of interstate, I can call on somebody, I'm not afraid of that, but are there ways in which you can work across states to kind of think about regional challenges? Are there things that are happening or things that should happen that aren't happening? Let me start with Senator Oliver, I see you ready, go for that.
Sure, what we know is on the right, there is ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, started by the Heritage Foundation. The right is very organized in this way, where they have model legislation, but we know this model legislation pops up in all the Southern legislatures. So the bill that's being heard on school vouchers in Tennessee is the same bill in Georgia to get voted on, as well as Florida and Texas. So we, as Black caucus members, should be talking more. We should be calling more on our, organizing spaces like we already have, like the national NBCSL, National Black Caucus of State Legislators, to have these conversations and talk more regionally and have a coordinated strategy. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't see that happening as much, but we should be doing that, especially now in this season, because we know their playbook is going to stay the same across the South. And we need a more stronger, united, we need super coalitions to really push back against this extremist regime.
They are following Project 2025 to the T. Everything that it said, to the T, I believe, in all of our states. And so that's why spaces like this are very important, because this question has brought up something. It's like, we need to actually make this happen, not just talk about it, but be about it. I know Louisiana, our legislator, we don't meet until after Mardi Gras. And so, so we don't go in until April the 14th, and then we'll get out sometime in June. But we can always Zoom, because I believe a lot of our legislators who are on this dais with me today, that they're already meeting. And so, yeah, we need to definitely create a strategy and make it happen.
Representative Kareem and then Representative Daniels, I saw.
Just in that same vein, I just think it's imperative that we do meet and that we do come into spaces together, because we are all facing the same challenges. I can remember when I first got elected, and it was 16 or 17, we had a joint legislative meeting with the Louisiana caucus, and it was exceptional. And it had us very prepared for the following year as we went into session. So I just think that those spaces are something that is so needed, and it just will prepare us for that upcoming session, because Alex is real. They give the mandate of what they want to see happen in our respective chambers, and they carry them out. Now, it's up to us to try to find some ways to defend or defeat some of that bad legislation. But collectively, if we start meeting together, it will be really good.
Representative Daniels?
So to answer your question, I am doing a pilot that you guys may not know about that are in the legislature, but your caucus leaders certainly do. I'm doing a pilot in about 8 states where we're testing legislation in 8 states to divide the other side. And so we're looking at the data, we'll be looking at the data to see. In Alabama, we did it, one piece of legislation last week, and it divided the other side to the point to where they started having to play defense. And so it's things like that. There are 21 pieces of legislation that I have that I've sent to about 8 different states, and then we're doing funding those pieces of legislation to make certain that the messages get out there in the right communities, just as a testing ground. I also had dinner with a couple of friends last night to talk about the need for a think tank. The other side do a great job of having a think tank presence in every state. However, for me, we're looking at a think tank because Alabama has the demographics and the subgroups that you will be able to test messaging on to figure out whether or not this messaging will be effective and will work with certain demographics. So we have the demographics, we have rural, urban, suburban, and so we have everything you'll need, and it's fairly inexpensive in a state like Alabama to test it so that we can deploy defensive strategies against some of the ALEC bills and other extreme bills like we did in 2019. On the House floor, we introduced an amendment to protect rape and incest, to get the other side on a vote on the House floor, on a vote. One guy said to me, he was so angry with me, he said, my wife didn't let me sleep in the room for 3 weeks because of that vote. And so when you start getting into and dividing them and getting them to start arguing with each other, then it builds a coalition for you in the minority to be able to move legislation. And so there are organizations like New Deal, but New Deal identifies certain leaders throughout the country that to be a part of that group. We do model legislation in New Deal where they take an idea, and we have what they call the Ideas Challenge. And the Ideas Challenge is the best ideas from various states, and that's shared with all the members of New Deal. And so when those pieces of legislation are shared, you find other members in other states reintroducing that piece of legislation in their respective state. But there's not a coordinated effort like there is at the national level on the other side. But we're having to play defense more so than offense. And then nationally, I think that the funders that are at the national level should start investing in places like the South, because that's where you're emerging in larger percentage of minority populations, and your base really is. And so that you can understand your base. Because what I've found is that people that look like me never get polled from a party standpoint. So therefore, the party doesn't understand the issues that I'm interested in or the issues that pushes me away. And so if you can't understand the constituents that have gotten you to the party, then you're not going to be able to sustain and be victorious long term. And so we have to have a think tank, whether it's regional that serves certain states, or we have to establish a think tank in every state that focuses on issues that impact people.
And before I turn to Senator Studer, I'll just note that we at the Brennan Center, as I said earlier, are talking about this very thing. And part of our deepening work is trying to answer that call. So it's very helpful for us to hear that this would be of use, and there should be more to come soon, among other things, to directly engage state legislators. Senator Stewart, you were going to add.
Very briefly, I know we're short on time, but I just want to say that all of our states in the Deep South, we're cousins. Alabama, Mississippi, we're twins. But North Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee, we have some of the same struggles. So last year, I saw an attack, and it's still going on now, on child labor. And I saw kids dying in the workplace. And I saw them as working in dangerous conditions. This was happening all over the Deep South. The attack on child labor. So I was able to pass a bill and sponsor and pass a bill last year, and it was modeled after Arkansas that strengthened child labor protections and will hold corporations that hurt our kids, or either, unfortunately, when kids die, it increases civil and criminal penalties on those corporations. And that came out of Arkansas. And so for me, I'm intentional about what I follow. I follow the Tennessee Holler. I follow them on their social media as well, and just really work to be, I read the Pew research state policy newsletter that they have, and as well as the Economic Policy Institute. All of those resources really work to inform my politics.
I want to combine a series of questions I have read here about participation. There are questions about the effects of voter suppression on the elections that you all run. And I want to connect it to something I heard earlier, and I think it came from you, Representative Walters, about the extreme members that you see running committees. What we know in the South is that in a large part of the country this is happening, but it's most pronounced in the South. There are fewer competitive elections than there ever have been, both because people don't run, and so people run unopposed, or there's pretty much, non-existent opposition, partly due to gerrymandering. I'm interested in both that and the low turnout that happens, again, another marker of elections in the South. Is that having an effect, as you see it, on the work that gets done in legislatures, what is possible, or perhaps whether people are willing to talk to you if it's true that they come from more of the extremes than before? I can start with you, Representative Walters, since you brought it up.
Sure thing. So I talk to the extreme. I talk to the extreme because two members of the Labor Committee, they are from my area, the chair and the vice chair. So I talk to the extreme. And I try to find some type of middle ground. And so far, the only thing that we can find middle ground on is prayer. But not.
It changes things.
It does. But nonetheless, what we repeat the question one more time.
Oh, sure. What affect the lack of competition and perhaps low turnout?
Okay. Yeah. So right now, we are in litigation over the state legislature maps. We're due 6 more seats in the House, 3 more seats in the Senate. We were able to gain another congressional district this past cycle. So now we are taking this fight to the state legislator maps. And so that is not easy for everybody. And so one question that we get asked sometimes, well, you all aren't voting, so why do we even need another minority seat? And so we're right now in conversation on how to energize our voters so that they will get out to go to the polls, because we have a constitutional amendment. We have 4 constitutional amendments that are on the ballot in March. And so, I think we are in March. And so, nonetheless, I mean, it's coming quick. And one of them will allow the legislator to establish a list of felonies to where a juvenile can be tried as an adult for all crimes. Well, we already have the Children's Code and we already have the Constitution, but for a case that came out of Jefferson Parish, that freed this young man. I think it actually freed him to where he would only be tried under the juvenile statute. It was because the Children's Code and the Criminal Code did not match. And so, they fought it and appealed it and whatnot and won. And so, nevertheless, Louisiana legislature can barely spell legislature. So we don't need to try to establish felonies when something is right there already on the books.
Got it. Other thoughts about the level of competition or the lack of it affecting the work?
I just want to say gerrymandering has, as a Selma native, I live, eat, sleep, drink voting rights. And when your community is gerrymandered, you're gerrymandered out of opportunities. You're gerrymandered out of funding opportunities, employment opportunities, historic preservation. I know I have a district. My district is unique because it's significantly Republican as well, and rural. Well, it's become more Republican, and my district is uniquely situated because it sits between the 2 black congressional districts. In Alabama, we were able to be awarded. We had to fight through the courts to have a second black opportunity congressional district, and 4 of those counties are in my district. When I can tell you, there is a lot. We have a populace that is really, because of the gerrymandering, that has really checked out of civic life. They don't think their vote matters. And now we have to go in as leaders to remind them that they do matter, that what I said, I point back to my comment earlier about how we have to give people something to vote for. When you give us a chance, we will elect the person of our choice, but we just have to ensure that we have those opportunities.
Senator Oliver, I noticed, I know that you in your district represent Fisk University, and I'm thinking about this in context of Senator Stewart's comment about needing things to vote for. One of the things we hear a lot, and certainly it's evident in some of the data we've gotten back, is that young people have not turned out in the numbers that they did, say, in 2020, and that there are some concerns that maybe they're checking out, as others are, because there aren't things to vote for. Are there strategies or ways that you've thought through how to reach that group or try to bring them in that maybe we need to be thinking more carefully about?
Yeah, I represent 4 HBCUs in my district, Tennessee State, American Baptist College, Fisk, and Meharry Medical College. And that is a golden opportunity to harness young people, but we gotta connect the dots for them. Because we can't just stop at protesting, right? We gotta help them move through that civic engagement pipeline and say, okay, what's next? And also connect the dots from what's happening in the legislature to how it affects them in real life. One being Tennessee State's historical underfunding has been one tool that we've used to help organize young people in Tennessee to leverage their power. But one of the things working against them, in addition to gerrymandering, is that we don't allow students to use their college ID to vote, and there are no polling precincts on a college campus in Tennessee. So it's specifically designed for them not to participate in this process. So we've been fighting for that. I've carried bills to make sure that they could use a college ID, and it's been, stopped every time.
Representative Kareem, yes.
One thing I want to emphasize is that sometimes when incumbents get in office, they get used to the stacking and the packing. You don't need 90, 80, 70% of black folk in your districts to win an election. And they put all us in one district or 2 districts, and we don't have any input on those swing districts that we possibly could change or flip. Because we want to make sure that we maintain our village or our little hamlet, and we don't look at the collective, and we have to stop that. And that's one of the fallacies about incumbency and running for office. You got to know the numbers. I mean, you don't need 70, 80, 90% of black folks, and I'm using that as an example, to win your respective office. You have to make sure that you spread the love around so you can influence other districts. Now, telling an incumbent that can be hard sometimes, but that's how you change the dynamics of where we are. We have to have influence in other districts. If we can't win the district, at least impact who comes or who wins that particular district.
I'm going to see if I can have time for one more question, just briefly for everybody. If we have a lot of people watching, obviously a lot of the audience here, what's the one thing you want them to walk out of this conversation remembering about what your experience is and what you see in the road ahead for what legislating looks like in the South?
The first thing is Mississippi and Alabama are the only 2 states left that celebrate Robert E. Lee and Dr. King's birthday, and we got to change that. Can you imagine? Donald Trump got elected, sworn into office. We celebrated Dr. King's birthday and we celebrated Robert Lee all in the same day. Now, I don't know if you're going to be the first one or Mississippi's going to be the first one, but one of us got to change that. We've got some difficult days ahead. It ain't no question about that. They're making, in Mississippi It's a big debate about income tax, but what they're really doing is a tax shift. They're giving the wealthy the breaks and putting the tax back on working people. It's going to be a $2.2 billion deficit in Mississippi, and with the cuts coming from Washington, we don't even know what to expect. And we know Alabama and Mississippi, we can't afford them to cut nothing. But the burden's going to be on us. They're raising the tax on the gas. They claim they're cutting the grocery tax, but they're still adding another % on that. Look, we have to know that all we got now is us and God.
Community.
And that's it. We're going to have to strengthen our villages and our hamlets, and we're going to have to start talking to one another. But more importantly, we got to start loving one another. We got to quit all this marginalization of one another and devaluing who we are and our worth. Now, that might not be the politics that you want to hear, but we've got to do a better job of community. And that's the only ways that we're going to make it out of this situation that we're in right now.
I don't know if there's more to add, but I'll give the space to anybody else if they'd like to. It's probably, oh, go ahead. No, well, yeah, go for it.
I would say, if you don't remember anything else, it would be political imagination. You have to have an imagination beyond your circumstances. We just sung the Negro National Anthem. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Political imagination.
Sir, Senator.
I think in this moment, what comes to mind for me is I lean on my faith, and we have to remember that we are more than conquerors, and we are winning right now. As much as it doesn't look like it, we are winning. A dying mule kicks the hardest. Yeah. And right now, a dying effort of the Southern Confederates are trying to hold on to what they got. But the progress we've made since 1964 and before that, our ancestors, we got to hold on to that. And remember and keep that hope. Hold the line. Don't give in. Don't comply. And let's hold on to each other.
All right. Representative Walters.
Sure. I will leave you all with this. Anticipate the pushback from all of our legislators, but especially from the Louisiana legislature. A lot of the bills that are coming out of my legislator in particularly are unconstitutional. And so anticipate the pushback. And if you ever want to see, what's going on, we have a public video law to where our pardon and parole board, they have to have everything streamed to YouTube, and they have to make everything available to the public. But also every committee of our legislator, whether it be on the House side or on the Senate side. And if you ever have questions, suggestions, recommendations, you can feel free to reach out to me. Thank you all for extending this invitation to me. I'm extremely appreciative. I'm a North Louisiana native and representative, and so I appreciate the fact that you all brought I-20 instead of I-10 to the table.
Rounding us out, Leader Daniels.
Well, I think being informed, I think you need to leave here being informed as to what's going on in southern states. Oftentimes you never get the message. I would tell you that for me, the number that sticks out for me in the state of Alabama is 555,000. And that number sticks out to me because that's the number of infrequent African-American voters in the state of Alabama. And so there has to be some issue reason that we're not connecting with those infrequent voters. And so we believe that we have to do a better job of trying to understand what we have not, what we can't understand. And what we can't understand, and what I can't understand, is why there's so many people that doesn't bother to vote in a midterm. That could be the difference in a governor's race in the state of Alabama. And so I hope that those of you that are in this room that are from different parts of the state, of the country should understand that the South is where it began, and the South is where it will end. Yes, sir. And so there needs to be more investments in infrastructure. The other thing is, make an investment in infrastructure that just posts on social media without asking for results or outcomes is a waste of your dollars. We have to be more intentional about outcomes. When we give money to organizations, we have to ensure that the data matches the investment. And we have to start doing that. And in order for us to move forward, we have to make investments and understand the outcomes of those investments. Because when I hear about the investments that are made, and my colleagues and I don't hear from some of these organizations, that concerns me. So we need to have some dialogue in other communities in order for us to come together. When your one issue is being dealt with, if you're not on the front lines with me on my issue, I'm not going to be on the front lines with you on yours. And so those groups out there, even within my own party, that sit on the sidelines when it comes to African American issues, if you don't come to the table, we're going to sit it out next time.
Well, that, I guess, concludes our panel. I want to thank Anthony Daniels, Kabir Kareem, Rob Stewart, Charlene Oliver, and Joy Walters for joining us. And thank all of you all in the room and listening online for supporting the work of the Brennan Center. We really hope that many of you, if not all of you who are in the room, will stay for lunch. And finally, once again, thanks to the National Center for the Study of Civil Rights and African American Culture at Alabama State University. Thank you.